In just a few minutes, let's learn how to leverage Particle Auth to introduce social login functionality within Avalanche dApps. Avalanche has positioned themselves really well for consumer-facing use cases, and thus when you're building powerful applications on Avalanche, it's important that those applications are accessible. So the onboarding experience needs to be simple, and the way in which interaction is facilitated within these dApps also needs to be flexible. To achieve this, today we're going to create a demo application. This demo app will look a little bit different from the previous ones that we've done over the past few weeks, as it'll include either logging in with Google or X. Then this login either facilitates the creation of a new wallet, or it'll log you into an existing wallet, and then it'll display all of that social information, either the Twitter handle or the Google name, icon, etc., within a little profile card. We'll also print the balance, return the associated address, and test some basic functionality with a send message button. So in just a few minutes, let's learn how to integrate Particle with an Avalanche applications. All right, so let's dive into it. As I mentioned, we're going to be building a demo application here. This demo app will be separated into two main components. The first will be the login page. In this case, we're going to facilitate either wallet creation or login, depending on the state of the user, through either a Google account or a Twitter account. Once a user has signed in, we're going to display some information about their connected account. We'll also retrieve balance, retrieve the wallet address, and create a small button for signing a message to test the wallet pop-ups. So of course, first to begin, we'll need to import a few base libraries. We can start by importing React, and then specifically we can import useState and useEffect. We can also go ahead and import Web3 from Web3, and we'll also need to import three libraries from Particle. The first will be the master Particle Network object. If you've watched any of these videos before, then you probably recognize this. This is just simply Particle Network from @particle-network/auth. Additionally, we can import Avalanche from @particle-network/chains. And then we can also import Particle Provider from @particle-network/provider. And then finally, we can import our CSS, which will just be ./app.css. Okay, so now with all of our base libraries imported, we'll need to configure the Particle Network object. We can do this in a variable called particle and set it equal to new Particle Network. And then in here, we'll have to define a few configuration options. Although before we do that, let's head over to the Particle Network dashboard and create a new project. Okay, so now I'm here on the Particle dashboard. I can click on add a new project, and I'll name this Avalanche. Now that I'm in here, we can create an application. Of course, in this case, I'm building a web app, so I can select web and name this something like demo app. And then I can throw the domain in which this application is hosted right here. Okay, so now with the project and app created, we can copy the project ID, the client key, and the app ID. Now you can throw all those into environment variables and we can continue. Okay, so here in the Particle Network configuration, we can start by defining the project ID. This will be process.env, and in my case, React app project. We can also define the client key and the app ID. We can move on to some additional configuration of this particle object. Let's start by defining the default chain in which we're going to be working with today. We can do this in chain name. And of course, this is an Avalanche tutorial, so this will be avalanche.name. And then we can also do the chain ID, which will just simply be avalanche.id. And then additionally, we can define some specific configurations about the wallet pop-up within an object here called wallet. To start, I'm going to set a few basic configurations, display wallet entry to true. This will essentially tell the application to add a little particle pop-up on the bottom right corner of the screen that will allow you to interact with the particle wallet. Additionally, I'm going to set the UI mode to dark. Okay, so now that we have particle configured, we can move on to configuring Web3. Let's do this in a conditional that checks if window.web3 is initialized, and if it isn't, then we can do window.web3 equals new Web3, and then in here we can pass in a new instance of Particle Provider, and then within Particle Provider pass in particle.auth. We've now imported all of the base libraries that we need, configured Particle Network, and configured Web3. We can move on now to creating the actual application itself. We're going to contain all of this in one main app component. So we can create a variable called app and set that to react.functional component. Okay, so to start here, we'll need to set up a few variables for the state of user information, as well as the state of the Avalanche balance that we'll be pulling in a moment. Let's start with the user information. So we can do this by defining an array that contains user info and set user info, and then we can just set that equal to use state and then pass in null. We can do something similar for AVAX balance and set AVAX balance. And in this case, we can set the type to either string or null. So with those defined, let's create our first function. This will be fetch AVAX balance. It'll be pretty simple. We're just gonna be grabbing the AVAX balance of the connected wallet. Let's do this in a variable called fetch AVAX balance, set that equal to a sync address and then of type string. We'll be calling this function and passing in an address later. So to handle that address and retrieve its balance, we can start by opening up a variable called balance away and set that equal to await window.web3.eth.get balance and then pass in our address. Then we can call set AVAX balance and call window.web3.utils way and pass in balance way, and then we'll be converting that to Ether. We can now move on to creating our handle login function. This will be the primary logic backing our sign in with Google and sign in with Twitter buttons. We can call this handle login, and then it'll take a parameter of preferred auth type, which will either be Google or Twitter. We're going to start with a one-line conditional. This will check if a user is currently logged in. If they're not, then it'll initiate a login of either Google or Twitter, depending on the button pressed. And if they are logged in, then it'll just retrieve their information. So we can save this in a variable called user, and we can check if particle.auth.is login. If they aren't logged in, then we can do await particle.auth.login, and then pass in preferred auth type. If they are logged in, then we can do particle.auth.getUserInfo. So we're defining user by first checking if a user is logged in or not. If they aren't logged in, then we initiate a login, which will then return their user info. And if they're already logged in, then we can just get the user info right there. So then we can do set user info, then pass in user. And then finally in here, we can quickly fetch the Avalanche balance and update it as a user logs in. So let's start by defining a variable called accounts and do await window.web3.eth.getAccounts. And then we can use that variable to call fetch AVAX balance. And then we can just do accounts and 0. So we're handling all of the login right here, setting the user info, and then quickly fetching the Avalanche balance of the account. Okay, we're about halfway done with this part of the application. Let's move on to creating two quick functions. So first will be a function called copy to clipboard. This isn't required, but I want to create this function as later I'm going to be creating a button that allows you to copy the address of the signed in account to your clipboard. So to create the logic for this, we can just set it in a variable called copy to clipboard and take a parameter of text. And then it'll very simply just call navigator.clipboard.writeText. And then copy the text variable. Okay, so the last function that I want to define here is the logic behind the sign message button. This will also be quite simple. We're just going to be signing a regular string. So let's call this sign message. It'll be asynchronous, and we can first define the message. We can just do gm particle. And then once again, we can pull the accounts, window.web3.eth.getAccounts. And then with the message defined and our accounts defined, we can just call window.web3.eth.personal.sign. And then we can pass in message, accounts, 0, an empty string that takes place of the password parameter because our wallet is already unlocked. And then we can also do some error handling here with error and signature. And then if error is defined, then we can do error and pass in the error here. If it's not defined, then we can just print out the signature. All right, and that's all there is to the sign message logic. So finally, before we start formatting all of this, let's quickly open up a use effect and check if user info is defined. Then we can do window.web3.eth.getAccounts, and then we can update the Avalanche balance. This ensures that the balance is always up to date. We'll maintain a continually updated Avalanche balance. And then we can close this off by passing in user info. Okay, so now all of our base logic is done. We've defined fetch AVAX balance to retrieve the balance of the account. We've handled the social login. We've created a copy to clipboard function, created our sign message function, and opened up a listener to continually update fetch AVAX balance as user info changes. We can now move on to the less exciting part of this, which is formatting and structuring all of this. So we can do this by just opening up return. Okay, so we can skip past writing all of that for the sake of time, but let's quickly review what all of this is doing. So if user info is not defined, meaning a user has not logged in, then we're creating two buttons here. One is the sign in with Google button, which we're adding a Google logo to right here. The other is a sign in with X or Twitter button, which we're also adding the X logo to here. We're also creating a profile card, which will display the name of the user, which is being derived from user info, displaying the Avalanche balance of the user, including the AVAX icon. Then depending on if the user has signed in with Google or Twitter, then we're displaying the Google email, Google ID, and the Google avatar. If it's Twitter, and if applicable, then sometimes we'll be able to display the Twitter email and Twitter ID. And finally, we're pulling the EVM wallet address from user info and adding that to our clipboard button copy Avalanche address that we defined earlier. And then finally here, we're also defining our sign message button. And that's about it. All we have left to do now is export default and then app. So that's about it. Let's run it and see if it works. So as you can see, looks like it worked. We have our sign in with Google button here and our sign in with X button right here. Let's go ahead and give the sign in with Google button a try. So as you can see, I have all of my Google accounts here. I'll select my particle testing account. And as you can see, I'm all logged in. Just from those 2 clicks from logging into my Google account, we've now signed into a fully functional wallet. So I can click copy Avalanche address and then I can paste it in here. As you can see, that's my Avalanche address. And then we can also try sign message. And of course, pretty straightforward. We have our sign message pop up here. So we can click on confirm. Now we've signed the message. Of course, we also have the wallet pop up right here. We chose to include this in the particle configuration from earlier. And from here, we can control the entire wallet. I want to move on very quickly and show you another example of the same application, but instead using smart accounts. So I went ahead and basically made a copy of that code. But in this case, I added about 10 lines to it. I imported smart account from particle network/AA, and I created the smart account variable here, which initiates a new instance of smart account with my Biconomy Paymaster API key right here. I've also set ERC4337 to true, and I've also throughout this code replaced the retrieval of accounts through window.web3, the smart account address derived from the smart account object here. We can sign in with Google, and in here you can see I'm actually in a different wallet. I have 0.1 AVAX in this wallet because this is my smart account. And this functionality was introduced in less than 20 lines of new code. We can open up the wallet pop-up here, and as you can see, we have the account abstraction indicator right here. Here we have the same account abstraction indicator with the same wallet address, and we can confirm. If you'd like to learn more about Particle Network, then I'll have an introduction video linked below. Additionally, if you'd like to play around with some of our web demos, I'll also have that linked below.